When you look at a picture like this, what do you think that this is? Is it a priest or a shaman type person? Is this perhaps Aaron from the Bible and his rod? Is this Merlin and his staff? Or Gandalf? Asclepius? A light bringer? Perhaps we're looking at the holotype of all of those and encompassed into one person. This is going to be a multi-parter, and each successive part will be in your top left-hand corner as we go through this. About 45-minute increments. I invite you to pause it now and grab a cup of coffee and come back. For what we're looking at is perhaps the holotype of all magicians that we think of today and sages. And what we're going to talk about is how a man became a priest and then became a venerated sage who had done a lot of great things. And in the process, he eventually became deified as a god. And whenever the Proto-Indo-European conflagration happened across Northern Europe there were some gods that got lost, and eventually he got pinched in and put along with some of those. But we'll get into that here shortly. What you're looking at is he's holding a light bulb, but in essence, this esoterically should be that he is holding a star. You'll understand later what that connotation means. In fact, I want you to remember this picture. Most people looking at the back of it or the background would realize that this is a time-lapse photography of somebody who has faced a camera towards the pole star at nighttime and that swirl that goes around. In doing so, each of these stars, like a boat, leaves a wake in its trail that it leaves behind, like a tracer. Should remember that as we talk about a few concepts here coming up. But those boats are quite often drawn by oars and so on, and of course with a Viking concept that's attached to these people we're about to talk about. One can understand how that goes along with it and is pulled into this symbology that they had that went well before that. The legendary Mog Ruth, Irish wizard, sun god, or an ancient astronaut. The Irish Celtic heritage is filled to the brim with unique and wondrous characters, from the tales of ancient and venerable high kings to their colorful pantheon and powerful wizards. Irish history is full of characters and events that are so outlandish they often seem too hard to grasp and explain. But luckily, thanks to early medieval Christian manuscripts that managed to preserve a good deal of Irish oral tradition, we can explore these myths and legends in a great detail, or at least what we have of them. One of the most interesting characters that appears in these myths is the mystical Mog Ruth, powerful druid and odd and supernatural powers. Credited with many larger-than-life deeds and the crucial turning points of Irish legendary history, this druid seems more like a god than a simple wizard. How can scholars best explain this strange, elusive hero? Well, I'm going to try to now. The wizard Mog Ruth. All the surviving literary sources from early medieval Ireland point to one place, Valentia Island, on the southwesternmost tip of Ireland. It is said here dwelt the famed druid Mog Ruth, or Mog Ruth, whose name translates to slave of the wheel. You see, we may not actually ever have this person's real name, because this is just an epitaph concept that could be put on a lot of ideals, but it goes with the zodiac. And it goes with these people that migrated and so on too, and they were a slave to the wheel. Well, no, the wheel was actually a slave to them. They were a slave to the grind. Well, this wheel that we're talking about quite often is on the ground here. But quite often it's up in the sky up above and it's spinning. So again, we may not ever know his exact name. We're going after an epitaph, but one would think that that would be unique somewhat. Well, just off the top of my head, you know, I'm always into Conan and all those type of things. Couldn't Conan the Barbarian be referred to as a slave of the wheel? If you remember his origins. Valentia Island is known as Irish as Derbray, an oak wood. This made Mog Ruth a hero of Munster, like the cheese, a Gaelic Irish kingdom in the south of modern-day Ireland, in whose territory Valentia Island was found. I believe it's in the county of Kerry, by the way. The island itself is steeped in an ancient history and shows traces of early habitation, especially with the remnants of dolmens, which we've talked about, and passage tombs. It is possible that for the inhabitants of ancient Munster, the island was seen as a remote location and likely place for odd myths and curious heroes. So you take a look at this landscape, and isn't that gorgeous? Well, if we go back a few thousand years, all these little islands were all connected, and the sea was out much farther past them, where it falls off the continental shelf too. Yeah, so all this became flooded in. Mog Ruth is described as an all-powerful druid, Old Irish dru, which means sorcerer or wizard. It actually means sacred to the oak tree also, and I always, when I think of dru, I think of the idea of, well, people being named Andrew, but in ancient shows like Conan we talked about, or like Willow, if you've ever seen it, when he starts conjuring the old lady up whenever he has this sacred tree branch, which is Charlindria's wand, so it's a witch's wand, and he starts trying to call her forth, and he starts calling her, he says Drew Deru, which actually would mean from sorceress to sorceress, this to this, that to that, and he starts trying, which if you've seen the show, he messes up quite a bit. He's no good at it, and she turns into all kinds of myriad creatures before she tells him to concentrate, and he finally does. If you listen in there too, he talks about the Tuatha Danann, and then again the Danalora, and Tuatha, and it has connections to this too, and it shows you that whoever researched for that right there knew what the hell they were doing. It was a Ron Howard movie too. But he's described as an all-powerful druid, like the Major, a pinnacle type, who was described all sorts of supernatural powers. Some sources call him blind, while others say that he was one-eyed, which is connected to a lot of things, like Horus. Like many sun gods are always looked at as if he's peeking down on you, like a bird looking into a Coke can and you're inside it. Or then again, if we're talking about these people here, don't we have an echo of that happens with Odin himself? In certain tales, he loses one of his eyes in the snowy Alps on the journey, while the other he lost while trying to stop the course of the sun for 2 days straight. It is said that he could grow to enormous size and possess the power to turn men into stone with his breath. Setting that idea of setting stone with breath aside for a moment, and gigantism and so on that we can go along with it, when you're trying to stop the sun for 2 days, we can also see that this is a solar type deity. For so many times we've talked about how the sun falls 1 degree per day and rises 1 degree per day throughout the year. It has 2 pivot points, one of which is the height of summer, the other which the death of winter. which happens at December 21st. So the sun falls 1 degree per day in angle, from being almost straight up to slowly at more and more of an angle, which in reality is whenever the sun is more on the southern hemisphere than the northern. But in our view, it falls 1 degree per day. This is the reason Sumerians gave the ball 360 degrees rather than just 100. Also, it works with sacred geometry and maths that work with the size of everything from your body to down to atoms to all the way up to sizes of the cosmos and galaxies. So it's pretty important, but that's what they gave you. It is a declamation of 1 degree per day, and it seems like that goes with it, the whole sun worship thing going along. So it falls 1 degree per day, but where it ends up at, whenever it stalls for 2-3 days and then starts to rise again, is right around a constellation called the Southern Cross. So the ancients used to say that the Son of God died on the cross on December 21st and rose again in 3 days to save all of mankind, but I'm sure I've heard that somewhere before. Turning men into stone with his breath is a different idea. Whenever someone can speak something and it gets written down, that was magical at the time that we're talking about in ancient Egypt and so on, and so let it be written, so let it be done. It was the language of the gods, because the people that were utilizing this were gods of humanity. Egyptians were gods, Greek rulers were gods. They were all deified as such. Pretty much great people throughout mankind have been deified. They did great things. Turning someone into stone with your breath is weird. It could be looked at as when someone can speak words and they were chiseled into stone for all time. I say this one thing, and no matter what, people later can see what I said. It's pretty important. Nowadays we have books and all kinds of stuff, and all this that comes on after it, of course, knowledge, but it stems from that idea. But imagine a concept also like Medusa, where these Greeks at this time were able to chisel somebody into stone, and then you say, that is this person. Like a sculpture. And you look at some of those Greek statues, you can get the idea of where Medusa concepts come from, because they literally look like they must have caught the gaze of Medusa in that pose that they're in, because they are so realistic, or even over-realistic, to the point that that looks like someone was just caught in the moment. That's just one amazing art form that we can see pop up over time. But curiously, some of the descriptions sound as if they came straight from the science fiction movie. Mog Ruth supposedly flew in a special machine. It was called the Roith or the Oared Wheel. In some depictions, he rides an ox-driven chariot, which could be the same vehicle as the Oared Wheel. You're hearing that, and everybody in Ancient Aliens just rung me up over here. But no, if you look at all the ancient Sumerians and so on, they had this winged sun disk. And in Mithra and Sumerians, they had these people. They were in the little disk, and they were flying around, and it showed you they were flying with this. And so there were people, ancient people, flying at this one time, right? They were able to fly all around. Perhaps it was a connection not really to that, because people have lost the other connection with birds that comes from the eldest of times, whenever birds were seen as some type of rebirth mechanism, because we would leave our people out on daises, and the birds, much like vultures and so on, and that's why we have the depictions in the Reyes that's on the Egyptians and so on. That's a vulture concept, where it would take you up into heaven. It's where the angel's wings thing comes from. I've shown this far too many times. but also that oared wheel that we're talking about. So we can look at a four-spoked wheel and a circle around on it. And if we were to take and put people hanging out the side of it with an oar at each one of those points, now we're looking at a swastika. And it's spinning around. And if you take certain stars that are based right off the pole star itself that we have today, you might figure out where that concept comes from in a second way too. So, wind of March, you know how it blows in March. Our symbology for that in the modern day is kites. Let's go fly a kite. And the agility of birds. So you've seen birds fly and twist and turn. Either way, the vehicle in which he flies is fast, and within it, night is bright as day. A lot of people make things out of this. I believe we're talking about the sun. The druid carried with him a star-spangled, black shield with silver rim. This is again, of course, the cosmos, and this works along with Mithra and his robe, which had the stars on it, and other goddesses and so on we've talked about. The silver rim also connects to the moon. And one of his powerful weapons was a stone that turned into a poisonous eel when it was thrown into the water. By the way, eels aren't poisonous. Snakes can be very venomous, but eels aren't poisonous, but they can be electric eels too. The powerful breath of this wizard was enough to cause violent storms that could smite his enemies and sometimes turn them to stone. There are ancient folklore that are told about why the stones at Karnak are sitting there the way that they are. For a long time, people had this tale that that was one ancient army that, because of an ancient person like Mog Ruth, had come and done a special magic, and and then they all turned to stone. When I play D&D, there are concepts we can do like that. Looking at Willow, he had this little acorn that was supposed to pull off the same endeavor. If you've seen the movie, right? One second, get it a drink. But that stone's aligned in Karnak and other places. They always say that are armies and stuff that are going down through there. I did a recent video showing you that what that is something like a computer punch card. And it's not even where the stones are lined up. It's where they're not. And the lines of the in-between, much like a reverse negative image of something like Stonehenge, was delineating the same type of markers, hidden in another way. And for 2,000 years, people had no clue. Well, more. Supernatural powers. As for his appearance, Mog Ruth is almost always described in the same way. He wore a feathered bird mask and a hornless bull hide. So he didn't have horns, which he gave him sort of a shamanistic appearance. He was also incredibly old, and it is stated that he lived throughout the reigns of 19 ancient Irish kings. This is where we get the idea of Merlin from. That he's somebody like an elf that had been from long before and wisp on long past, and he was there to assist him. Especially in the version Excalibur, although instead of wearing a pointy cap in that one, they gave him a skull cap, didn't they? He wore a feathered bird mask. So now if that guy that we saw in the very first part was to turn around and look at you and you were to see something that looked like a wise old owl, are we not talking about some of these places that we've shown just this year and last year especially? Or Proto-Indo-European burials, so shamans that have been buried, and they had this bird mask along with this whole gown that was made of bird heads and so on. We found it over here, and we found it over there. So we're making a lot of connections with it. And he was the one that was the epitome of that whole cult that went on for thousands of years and was drawn over into Proto-European lands and conflagrated. But it looked like he was one of the first waves, because if you look deep into it, later it got hit over by the Saxons and so on, and that's whenever he got pushed into a secondary. And then the sun god is Lu. Right. So when you think of words like Louis, or names like Louis and Sonny, maybe they have a lot more to do with sunshine. But he wore a bull hide on his body, but a bird mask on. But that's just a cowling that he wore over, like a cape. His curious appearance is laden with pagan symbolism, especially considering the fact that the myths were pinned down by a Christian era. One writing gives the following description: the bull hide from a hornless brown bull belonged to Mog Ruth, was now brought to him along with his speckled bird mask with its billowing wings and the rest of its druidic gear. He proceeded to fly up into the sky, and along with the fire, and he continued to beat the fire towards the north as he chanted a rhetoric: I fashioned druids' arrows. So this is an ancient shamanistic rite, and driving the wind up to the north and so on. This is the sun coursing its path and trying to make sure it goes north to end winter and so on, the rites of spring. But also his mask had billowing wings. You know, as a kid, we had different types of Halloween masks, and my brother was this blue falcon. He had this bird mask. Remember Birdman? Extremely like that, where you actually take on a bird persona, but you've taken some bird wings and added it to the sides of it. And now we start looking like Mercury, Hermes again, and Valkyrie. And yet this guy was shown to have lived a long, long time, and or, like Asclepius or Thoth, more than one time. That's where we get Trismegistus from. So here's a depiction of him, and his one eye, his right eye still good, left eye out, along with a goddess pulling off this chant. But Irish druids were often thought to have magic powers, but Mog Ruth was powerful, even for a druid. So he was considered to be venerated as one of the big kingpins of it. Since the many different stories and legends concerning this wizard were written down in various stages of Irish medieval history, there's much disagreement about when Mog Ruth lived. Some state that he lived during the time that your computer is trying to reload, for no reason whatsoever. For it has enough memory to take on 60 of these things at one time, and I'm only really looking at one. Some state that he lived during the reign of the famed High King Cormac Mac Airt, who supposedly ruled sometime between the 2nd and 4th century A.D. So way back when, way back at the starting of biblical times. In fact, we're going to dip our toe here in a minute on some biblical stories and a connective and some Gnostic writings. Elsewhere, such as in the iconic book Lebor Gabala Aaron, Mog Ruth is said to have lived in the reign of the ancient king Conamel, who I supposedly have connections to, who supposedly existed some 2,000 years before Cormac Mac Airt. It's possible that these conflicting accounts and the confusion this caused led to the legend that the druid was extremely long-lived and saw the reigns of 19 kings. I'm not going to touch that any further right now. Demonized by Christians, though, many modern scholars come to the conclusion that Mog Ruth was most likely a personification of an ancient pagan storm and or sun god, This would not be the first in Irish mythology, where many chief deities are subjects and main characters in colorful stories. Such gods were often attacked by later Christian teachings, and indeed during the Christian era in Ireland, the character of Mog Ruth was vilified and demonized. This was doubtless an effort to distance the Irish folk from their ancient traditions and draw them closer to the Christian doctrines. You know, the first thing that they wanted to do was tell you that, oh, well, the devil came up and told you all your stories. He told us a special different one. Whenever you dig into it real deep, it's the same damn story. It's just being retold again. It's the reason there was so much trouble with turning it over, but I don't want to go into all that right now. But through this, we have some great stories, even one that names Mog Ruth as the executioner who actually beheaded John the Baptist. This was supposedly bringing an eternal curse upon the Irish people. Similar practices existed throughout the early Christian era, where the clergy actively demonized folk heroes and pagan gods, making them evil and devilish. Say that he was part of something, did this, that, and the other, da-da-da. You can imagine it, right? Yeah. Well, there are still other connections in the Bible, too. Is there a pagan druid in Jerusalem? Well, certain medieval manuscripts place him in Jerusalem at the early beginnings of Christianity there. It was said he became a student of Simon Magus, a sorcerer and religious figure that taught Mog Ruth all of his supernatural powers. If you look into this Simon Magus, it's quite something. Things like the Templars come to mind much later. When I was a kid, I used to watch Roger Moore and the Saint. You ever watch that? It's really like a 007 kind of thing going on, but they ended up making a movie out of it, and it was pretty good. He puts on all kinds of disguises and does things, but if you've ever watched the very first of it, he's a little kid that gets orphaned, and he's at this orphan school, and he tells you that his name is Simon Magus. And so there's a connection there again, too, where, again, I tell you, like, throughout my life, just people keep throwing stuff in, and it's done semi-on purpose. But then he ended up being Simon Templar. He turned into the Templars and became part of the Saints. If you understand how the Saints worked out, and that they're really just the conflagration that becomes another pantheon in the first place, it's just a reblending of the same thing now, isn't it? Here's a weird picture of Simon Magus, and if you look at him, it's showing him with one of those Sumerian hats on right there. Yeah. But also, there are angels next to him, but those are demons. Certainly. These legends tell that together with his daughter, Tlacta, an equally powerful druidess, he traveled east to Simon, who taught him and helped him to construct his powerful flying machine, the oared wheel, the swastika. Here the vessel is described in more detail, having sides of Rowan wood, like Rohan, windows of glass, and poles made of electrum in it. You can see how ancient astronauts would get all over this. This is one of the things that's been in my box there, and it occasionally makes a rattle over there that I talk about from time to time. This ship deafens anyone who hears it, blinds anyone who sees it, and kills anyone who strikes. This is like the Ark of the Covenant. One cannot help but connect such a description to the theories of the ancient astronauts and extraterrestrial flying machines that could have been described in very ancient periods of human history. Is there more to the story of Mog Ruth than first meets the eye? That one eye that he's got? Early myths say that Mog Ruth received the territory of Fig Mage Finn, or Fermory in the far south of Ireland, for his own descendants. The Fermoy, describe of medieval Ireland, they do indeed claim their descent from this druid, but they were still ruled over by the more powerful O'Keefe's clan that was there. The Fermoy have more to do with it, but it probably deserves its own video pretty much in the way that worked out. Similar tales say that Mog Ruth, upon his return from the siege of Drom Demgair, settled in the Fermoy area, becoming the ancestor to the Fir Mage Finn, or Fermoy. An important Iron Age hill fort lies in the hills some 2.4 miles south of Fermoy, known as Carniternia or Turnax Cairn, which could be related to these cairns in ancient times, as powerful as any god. The exploits of Mog Ruth are featured most prominently in the Irish saga of Forbhaes Drama Dramhair, or the Siege of Knocklong. Here he is one of the principal characters alongside the High King Cormac MacEirt. Curiously, it is here that King Cormac is presented as a somewhat evil character, which is held back. Well, this works in the idea of Merlin helping out Arthur too and directing him in certain ways. But it is a stark contrast from his usual portrayal as just kind and successful king as far as Cormac goes. In this tale, Mog Ruth successfully utilizes his supernatural powers to halt an invasion from Cormac, driving him back in defeat, or perhaps satiating or giving hints to the land, or credence to the land. At his side, Cormac had his chief druids, which was named Kek, which is power, Crotha, which is creator, Sithmore, which is great battle, Keithark, which is smiter, and Sith Rua, noble battle. Sith? Is it Kith or is it Sith? Sith? I am not sure. It was these 5 druids alongside Cormac and all of his forces who faced Mog Ruth. Here you can look at what's left of an ancient castle, and you can tell this thing was 1, 2, 3 stories with an attic type thing in it. And they think it was just a little square, and it was a lot bigger. In fact, you're still standing on the castle grounds right now when you take the picture here. Knocklong Hill in Limerick, the site of the legendary Knocklong, or the Siege of Knocklong. So this is where they said it had happened at. Wow, it locked up again. See if I can get it going again here, people. Seriously? And it's going to reload again. Are you tired of it? I am too. Throughout his saga, many fabulous and supernatural events transpired. During the ensuing battle, Mog Ruth asked for his powerful poison stone, which he describes as my hand stone, my 100 fighter, my destruction of my enemies. This indicates that this stone was a stone's sort of a powerful weapon. Again, this calls forth that acorn or stone that was in Willow. When the druid began reciting a chant, the stone transformed from a fiery, hard stone into the red water snake that coiled around its victims, a sea eel, a vulture among vultures that separated body from soul, an adder, which is a poisonous viper, of 9 coils around the body. Well, this all has to do with the cosmos and death and time, but later, Mog Ruth sends forth his powerful breath that turns the stories and sands of the earth into flaming balls of fire that are hurled against the enemy army. And now I'm starting to get an idea of a meteor strike, or perhaps a volcano eruption. Going back to the Simon thing, because I'm not sure it goes back to it here. Simon, if you're not aware of it, he ended up having fights with Paul. He was one of the people that they were going back and forth with on what actually happened in the early church. So if that happened differently, I guess it might be different now, huh? If you believe that that's the way it went down. For if you look at the ancient Gnostic tales, it'll actually tell you straightforward that they got into this battle where Simon was sitting there teaching and he showed up, and when he showed up, he was supposed to refute him. And in doing so, Simon spoke the name of God and started floating out over the crowd. Yeah, he levitated. First of all, before that, he had a guy come up and he spoke in his ear and he fell dead on the ground. Then he rose up and floated above the crowd and started doing things, but then Paul said that he was a false teacher. And he called the true name of God, and whenever he called the true name of God, Simon fell, and whenever he fell, he landed on the ground so hard it broke his legs in 3 places. And then all the people there, all of a sudden, who were just all thinking this dude was great, he's calling people back from the dead, he's floating and everything. Believe it or not, they threw stones at him. Yeah, and so there's more to the story that goes off of that, but isn't it crazy that that was almost in canon? You can still find parts of it in Acts, but it's something that was thrown out of canon. A part of it was taken and omitted out. It was supposed to have shown that God was the true God, but in that way it also showed that if somebody wasn't worshiping the true God, they could kill people and bring them back to life by just speaking in their ears and float above crowds. So I guess that didn't come across too good, huh? What do you think? In another event, Mog Ruth has to face 3 female druids from the enemy army, and these druidesses transform themselves into brown sheep with iron beaks. The druid then utilizes his magical kindling wood, tinder, and flint in order to fashion powerful supernatural dogs that pursue these sheep. Curiously, the same elements appear in the story of Monaghan Mac Fancal, or Fiachni. God, however you pronounce that, forgive me. Another mythical medieval Irish folk hero. Following these events, Mog Ruth adorns his animalistic clothes, garments of power, and exhales air into the heavens. He then seemingly flies and transforms into a black cloud that rains blood on the enemy's camp. Again, I'm starting to get that idea of a volcanic type idea. Now you can always see a lot of weird things in the clouds here. Hey, can you see the Godzilla looking thing that's right here with his arms and his head? Or is that a horse and there's a rider on it and he's tucked down tight and they're going real fast? He's fixing to run right off this ledge and take this big jump. Who did he leave behind over here? Mog Ruth defeated many Irish heroes throughout shape-shifting and controlling the elements. And again, he was an elementalist. And somebody that would utilize illusion. But illusion, illuminate is from lighting. Illu is from the ancient word for gods that was in the Anatolian area. So it kind of has connections all through that. Throughout the medieval Irish history, Mog Ruth was mentioned in many places at different eras. This indicates that he was likely a very popular figure in Irish history and folk tales. The earliest references date to the mid-7th century and occur in the 9th century Old Irish poems. The above-mentioned saga also in the Book of Leinster from the second half of the 12th century. Stories of the arch-druid Mog Ruth were still told in Ireland in the 17th century. Some of these things just started fading away. But we shouldn't let these things get faded away too far. Movies should be made or something about this. But we'd have to have it right and get into it deep enough. I don't know if there's somebody willing to go to that degree. The stories tell this druid there had 3 children. In the sagas they are mentioned in two sons, Furcorb and Buan, and he also had a famous daughter, the druidess Tlagda. Her story is also deep and detailed and deserves an article of its own, and I'd agree. So are we talking about more than humans? Some scholars note that the heavy symbolism used in the description of Mog Ruth, in particular his flying rowing wheel, suggests a pre-Christian sun deity that survived in the form of a powerful folk hero. A conflagration of the two, and I would have to agree. It's connected to things like this, where it's Liefel. And this is actually a phallic symbol people have talked about. I made a video about it and so on. And people would say, what is this? It's just a thumb or a phallic symbol poking up out of the ground. It has nothing to do with what does it do. Well, you just don't know. It's not even about it. It's about the shadow it casts and where that shadow casts about, because there are thousands and thousands of people living in every direction, just like down in that valley we see in the distance, who are farming and doing things, and it all sets apart rituals that they've had going on for tens of thousands of years and developed to this point that we have them now. But again, we have a large portion of this that's getting lost, for it tried to be taken in as all as one idea. And while it is that concept, maybe it should be exposed more rather than demonized. In fact, the rowing wheel could be linked to the Roith, an ancient wheel-shaped stone engraving from Southern Ireland, or with the similar Lagoon, a phallic stone at the Royal Hill of Tara. In pre-Christian Celtic territories, wheel-shaped images and engravings are not uncommon and are almost always linked to ancient sun gods or sun goddesses. We can also see from the surviving stories that Mog Ruth possessed the power to control all four elements of nature: fire, earth, water, and air. In a broader sense, these are the usual aspects described to tribal pagan gods who were almost always omnipotent and were either a sky god or a sun god himself. Here we're going on to part 2, guys, and I don't think it'll be a full one to make it through part 2. If I can keep it within it, it'll be in your top left-hand corner. Before y'all leave totally, let me know what you think downstairs and click that like button. Peace.